The muffled voices from the kitchen made me freeze in the hallway like I'd walked into an invisible wall. I was just getting a glass of water, something I'd been doing in my own house for 30 years without incident, when I heard my daughter-in-law Rebecca's laugh. But this wasn't the sweet, innocent giggle she used around me when she wanted something. Oh no, this was her real laugh, the kind that would make devils take notes on technique. "I can't stand living with that old woman much longer," she whispered to my son Kevin, her voice dripping with venom I'd never heard before. "But at least she pays for everything like a good little ATM. Just keep pretending a little longer, and soon this whole house will be ours anyway." Kevin actually laughed, a sound that hit me like a physical slap across the face. My own son, the boy I'd raised, fed, changed diapers for, and apparently failed to teach basic human decency, was cackling like this was the most hilarious joke he'd ever heard in his 28 years of life. "Yeah, just hang in there, babe," he said, his voice full of that conspiratorial tone that made my stomach turn. "Mom's getting more forgetful anyway. Pretty soon we can have her sign everything over and she won't even remember doing it. Hell, she probably won't even realize what's happening." Well. Here I was, thinking my memory was sharp as a brand new knife, when apparently I'd been diagnosed with convenient dementia by Dr. Kevin and his lovely assistant, Nurse Rebecca. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a chainsaw and still have leftovers. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because what happened next turned their little con game completely upside down. Something crystallized inside me in that moment. Not shock. I was way past shock at this point. This was pure, distilled fury, mixed with the kind of crystal-clear clarity that only comes when someone shows you exactly who they really are behind their mask. These two had been playing me like a violin in a symphony orchestra, and I'd been dancing to their tune without even realizing there was music playing. I stood there for another few seconds, letting their words sink in completely, making sure I hadn't misheard anything. Nope, they were definitely planning to steal my house. My money and my dignity while making me think I was losing my mind. How thoughtful of them to be so thorough in their betrayal. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine like the steel rod it apparently needed to be, and marched straight into that kitchen with the determination of a woman who just discovered she'd been harboring snakes in her own home. They were sitting at my kitchen table, the one I'd bought with my own hard-earned money, looking cozy as two thieves planning their next heist. Kevin had his arm around Rebecca's shoulders, and she was leaning into him like they were discussing vacation plans instead of my financial destruction. I looked them both dead in the eye and said, "So that's what you really think of me? Well, here's what I think of you. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your things and get out of my house, and my grandson Noah stays with me." You should have seen their faces. They went through more expressions than a silent movie actor having a complete breakdown. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air on dry land, while Kevin looked like someone had just told him Santa Claus was filing for bankruptcy and the Easter Bunny was his divorce lawyer. 24 hours, I repeated, letting each word sink in like nails in a coffin, then turned and walked away with more dignity than I'd ever mustered in my entire life. It all started over a year ago, when Kevin brought home this sweet pregnant girl named Rebecca. She was 22, had these enormous doe eyes that could make Disney animators weep with envy, and seemed completely head over heels smitten with my son. When she told me her mother Nancy had kicked her out for getting pregnant, my heart just shattered into a million pieces for her. "Mrs. Sandra," she said, tears streaming down her face like she was auditioning for the lead role in a tragic romance movie. "I know we're asking so much of you, but could I possibly stay here just until the baby comes? I promise on my grandmother's grave that I won't cause any trouble at all." Now, I'd raised Kevin as a single mother after his father passed away when Kevin was 15. A heart attack that came out of nowhere and left us both reeling. I knew exactly what it felt like to need help, to feel completely alone with a child depending on you, and nowhere to turn. How could I look at this pregnant girl, barely more than a child herself, and turn her away into the cold, cruel world? "Of course you can stay," I told her, meaning every single word, "for as long as you need. This house has plenty of room, and family takes care of family." The gratitude that lit up her face could have powered the entire neighborhood for a week. She threw her arms around me and sobbed, "Thank you," over and over until I was worried she might hyperventilate right there in my living room. Those first weeks were actually lovely, if I'm being completely honest. Rebecca was well along in her pregnancy, about 7 months, she said, so we didn't have long to wait for my first grandchild. She helped around the house without being asked, always checked before using anything of mine, and we'd spend long evenings discussing baby names, nursery themes, and all the wonderful things that come with preparing for a new life. "I hope the baby has your beautiful silver eyes," she'd say, rubbing her belly with such tenderness. "You're going to be such a wonderful grandmother, Mrs. Sandra. This baby is so lucky to have you." Kevin seemed lighter and happier than I'd seen him since his father died. The grief had hit him hard as a teenager, and he'd struggled with depression and self-doubt for years afterward. But with Rebecca, he was smiling again, bringing me coffee every morning like he used to do for his dad, and treating her like she was made of the most precious porcelain in the world. For the first time in forever, my house felt alive with hope and possibility. I started knitting baby blankets, researching cribs, and even began clearing out the spare room that would become the nursery. It felt like we were building something beautiful together, a real family unit that would give Noah everything he needed to thrive. But I should have trusted my instincts about the little inconsistencies that kept popping up like weeds in an otherwise perfect garden. How Rebecca's stories about her family background changed slightly, depending on who she was talking to and what mood she was in. How she'd examine my house when she thought I wasn't looking, not with the appreciation and gratitude of someone who'd been given shelter, but like someone taking detailed inventory of valuable merchandise. The biggest warning sign came when I tried calling Nancy to introduce myself. Any future grandmother would want to meet the other grandmother, share the excitement, maybe coordinate baby shower plans, right? But when I finally tracked down Nancy's phone number and called her, her reaction was swift and absolutely chilling. "Be very careful with that girl," Nancy said, in a voice so cold it could have frozen hellfire, before hanging up immediately without another word. I assumed she was just a heartless woman who'd abandoned her own daughter in her time of greatest need. Looking back now, Nancy was desperately trying to warn me about the hurricane that was heading straight for my peaceful, quiet life. Noah arrived on a beautiful spring morning that felt like the world was celebrating his entrance into it. For several wonderful, blissful weeks, life felt absolutely perfect in every possible way. He was this gorgeous baby with Kevin's thick dark hair and my silver eyes. And watching my son cradle his child for the first time made every sacrifice I'd ever made as a parent feel completely worthwhile. Then the post-pregnancy hormones settled down, and Rebecca's real personality crawled out of its hiding place like something dark and twisted emerging from under a rock. She became ridiculously, almost pathologically possessive of baby Noah, treating me like I was patient zero in some deadly epidemic that could contaminate her precious child. Every single time I'd reach for my own grandson, my own flesh and blood, she'd intercept me faster than a professional goalie defending the world championship. "He needs absolute routine and stability," she'd declare with the authority of someone who'd apparently earned multiple degrees in child psychology overnight. "Multiple caregivers will overwhelm his developing nervous system and cause lasting psychological damage." His developing nervous system? Sweet, merciful heavens. I managed to raise your boyfriend from infancy to adulthood without consulting the internet every 5 minutes or reading 17 parenting books. I think I can manage to hold a baby without causing permanent brain damage or emotional scarring. But the real entertainment began with what I started calling the great mystery of the vanishing valuables. Items around my house started disappearing with the consistency and precision of a professional magic act. My favorite perfume, the expensive French stuff I'd been saving for special occasions for the past 3 years, simply walked away from my dresser like it had developed legs and a travel agenda. When I mentioned it casually, Rebecca deployed her most innocent expression, complete with wide eyes and confused head tilt. "Are you absolutely sure you didn't finish it, Mrs. Sandra? Sometimes we use way more than we realize, especially when we're stressed or distracted." 3 days later, I nearly choked on my morning coffee when that exact fragrance wafted past me as she walked by my chair. Either my perfume had developed magical transportation abilities overnight, or our sweet little house guest had developed some seriously sticky fingers and a complete lack of shame. My grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in my family, decided to take an unscheduled vacation from my jewelry box. My reading glasses began playing an elaborate game of hide-and-seek that would have impressed professional magicians, materializing in the most bizarre locations throughout the house. I'd find them tucked behind sofa cushions, where I'd never sat, nestled next to the coffee maker like they were taking a caffeine break, or mysteriously appearing in the bathroom medicine cabinet. Small bills started evaporating from my wallet in amounts just small enough to make me question my own spending habits and memory. $20 here, $15 there, just enough to create that nagging feeling that something wasn't right, but not enough to be absolutely certain I was being robbed blind in my own home. Each time I'd politely inquire about a missing item, I'd receive the same response delivered with nauseating, patronizing concern. "Mrs. Sandra, are you feeling all right? Maybe you should keep a detailed list so you can remember where you put things. It's normal to be a little forgetful at your age." Oh, I was keeping track of things just fine, thank you very much. I was tracking exactly how much money I'd had in my wallet, precisely where I'd placed my jewelry the night before, and specifically how my belongings kept walking away whenever Rebecca was the only other person in the house. Living with Rebecca became like sharing my space with a ticking time bomb wrapped in designer clothing and fake smiles. She'd put on her Academy Award-worthy sweet act whenever Kevin was around. But the absolute moment he left for work each morning, her mask would slip faster than makeup running in a thunderstorm. "You're hovering again, Mrs. Sandra," she'd snap with ice-cold irritation when I tried to help with Noah or even just watch him play. "No wonder Kevin thinks you're getting confused about appropriate boundaries. Maybe you should find a hobby that doesn't involve interfering with my parenting decisions." The house that had been my sanctuary and safe haven for 3 decades started feeling like enemy territory, where I was constantly walking through a minefield. Rebecca rearranged my furniture without asking permission, threw away my personal belongings while claiming they were unnecessary clutter, and made it crystal clear through her actions and attitude that she viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to be managed and eventually eliminated. Kevin, meanwhile, seemed completely mesmerized by her performance, like he was under some kind of spell. When I tried having serious conversations with him about her increasingly problematic behavior, he'd wave me off like I was some paranoid old woman whose concerns weren't worth his valuable time. "She's still adjusting to new motherhood, Mom," he'd say with that patronizing tone that made me want to shake him until his teeth rattled. "Cut her some slack. Having a baby changes everything for a woman. She's probably just feeling overwhelmed and protective." But I noticed how he started looking at me differently too. Like I was suddenly fragile and unreliable, like I was a piece of antique furniture that might fall apart if handled too roughly. When I'd mention missing items or try to discuss Rebecca's dramatic attitude shifts, he'd get that same concerned expression that was becoming all too familiar. "Maybe you should schedule an appointment with Dr. Williams," he suggested one afternoon while bouncing Noah on his knee. "Just for a routine checkup, you know? Make sure everything's working properly upstairs. Sometimes stress can affect memory and perception." That comment sent ice water coursing through my veins like I'd been injected with liquid nitrogen. They weren't just systematically undermining my belongings and my comfort in my own home. They were undermining my credibility, my mental capacity, my very identity as a competent adult woman. I started keeping detailed mental notes of every interaction, every missing item, every small cruelty and calculated insult. If they wanted to paint me as unstable and incompetent, I'd need rock-solid evidence proving otherwise when the time came to defend myself. The truth hit me like a freight train traveling at full speed one evening when I was getting water from the kitchen. I heard them whispering in the living room, their voices carrying that conspiratorial tone that makes your blood run cold and your heart pound with dread. "My friend Jessica works at the county mental health facility," Rebecca was saying in hushed tones. She mentioned that getting someone evaluated for their own safety really isn't that complicated if you document concerning behaviors properly and consistently. Kevin's voice carried hesitation and uncertainty. "That seems pretty extreme, don't you think? Maybe we should explore assisted living options first, or hire a part-time caregiver to help her out." "Kevin, she accused me of theft again today, right in front of Noah," Rebecca replied with practiced emotion. "It's escalating rapidly, and it's creating a toxic environment for our son. Do you really want your child growing up around someone who's clearly losing touch with reality? I crept closer to the doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. She raised me, Rebecca. She sacrificed everything for me after Dad died. I can't just abandon her when she needs help. You're not abandoning her at all. You're ensuring she gets the professional care she desperately needs. And honestly, Noah deserves stability and security. This house, his college fund, all the financial planning she's done. If something happened to her tomorrow, wouldn't it be much better if we were already managing everything responsibly? That final sentence hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. They weren't planning to help me or care for me. They were planning to replace me entirely and take over my whole life. Those whispered conversations became more frequent and more detailed, floating through my house like toxic smoke that poisoned every breath I took. I'd catch fragments that stopped abruptly whenever I appeared. Clinical words like capacity evaluation, guardianship proceedings, and power of attorney that made my skin crawl with dread and my blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. One afternoon, after a particularly unpleasant encounter with Rebecca about my inappropriate attachment to Noah, I decided to visit Nancy and get some answers about what I was really dealing with. If anyone could give me honest insight into Rebecca's true character, it would be her own mother who'd lived with her for 22 years. Nancy lived in a modest apartment complex across town, the kind of place where working-class people go to downsize after their children move out. When she opened the door and saw me standing there on her doorstep, her face went through about a dozen different expressions before settling on something that looked like relief mixed with absolute dread. "Oh, Sandra," she said, ushering me inside quickly like she was worried someone might see us together. "She's done it again, hasn't she? My daughter's working her magic on another unsuspecting victim." Over coffee that neither of us touched because our hands were shaking too badly, Nancy unraveled the truth about Rebecca, like she was pulling threads from a sweater until the whole thing fell apart. Rebecca had a documented history, a long, detailed pattern of manipulation, theft, and emotional destruction that had torn through their family like a tornado, leaving devastation in its wake. "I didn't kick her out for being pregnant," Nancy said, her voice heavy with years of disappointment and exhaustion. "That was just the story she told to make you feel sorry for her. I made her leave because she stole my late husband's wedding ring, the only thing I had left of him after 43 years of marriage, and sold it online for quick cash to buy designer clothes." My stomach dropped like I was on a roller coaster. "Just for money? She stole your husband's ring for shopping money?" "Money, attention, control, sympathy. Rebecca collects whatever she can get from whoever's foolish enough to trust her," Nancy explained, with the tired tone of someone who'd had this conversation too many times. "She's like an emotional vampire. She finds people who want to help, who want to believe in her victim stories, and then she bleeds them dry before moving on to the next target." Nancy leaned forward, gripping my hands with surprising strength for such a small woman. "Sandra, whatever she's planning for you, please don't underestimate her capabilities. Rebecca doesn't just take things. She systematically takes over people's entire lives piece by piece until there's nothing left. She's done it to 3 different relatives that I know of, and now she's doing exactly the same thing to you." She pulled out a worn manila folder from her coffee table drawer. "I've been keeping track of her victims, documenting the pattern. Every single time, it starts the same way. She finds someone vulnerable, someone who wants to help family, and she moves in like a parasite." As I drove home through the early evening traffic, Nancy's words echoed in my mind like a warning bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I thought about the legal documents I'd glimpsed Rebecca studying when she thought I was napping, the whispered conversations about my supposed mental decline, the systematic way they'd been documenting every minor mistake or moment of confusion as evidence of my incompetence. They weren't just planning to inherit my house and savings when I died naturally of old age. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could take legal control of everything while I was still breathing and aware enough to watch it happen. When I walked into my house that evening, I looked around with completely new eyes and a fundamentally different understanding of my situation. This wasn't my safe, comfortable home anymore. It was their staging ground for a carefully orchestrated campaign. And I wasn't the beloved family matriarch. I was the target they'd been setting up for months without me even realizing the game had started. But Nancy had given me something invaluable. The knowledge that I wasn't going crazy, I wasn't imagining things, and I definitely wasn't their first victim. That meant this situation had a pattern, which meant it could be predicted, planned for, and most importantly, it could be stopped if I was smart enough and quick enough to beat them at their own game. Armed with Nancy's warnings and documentation, I started paying much closer attention to every detail around my house, watching for patterns and evidence like a detective working the most important case of her career. I found my old backup cell phone missing from the kitchen drawer, the one I kept with a spare SIM card from my days working at the insurance company, back when having multiple phones was a practical necessity. About a week later, that exact number called my main phone during dinner. When I answered, I heard Rebecca's voice talking animatedly to someone else about vintage pieces in excellent condition and online marketplace opportunities for quick sales. She'd accidentally pocket-dialed me while using my own stolen phone to conduct her little resale business, turning my home into her personal shopping mall. But Kevin's transformation was what really broke my heart into pieces that I wasn't sure could ever be put back together again. My son had always been gentle and trusting, maybe too much for his own good in this cruel world. After his father died suddenly when Kevin was 15, he'd been searching desperately for approval, for someone to need him completely and unconditionally. Rebecca had identified that deep-seated vulnerability with the precision of a heat-seeking missile and twisted it like a master manipulator. She'd somehow convinced him that my perfectly reasonable questions about missing belongings were actually signs of growing paranoia and mental decline. She'd made him believe that my legitimate concerns about her increasingly hostile behavior meant I was becoming difficult and unreasonable. Worse yet, she'd manipulated him into thinking that protecting her from my so-called false accusations was the same thing as protecting his new family from a dangerous, unstable old woman. "Mom, you're being completely unfair to her," he'd say with genuine conviction whenever I brought up the thefts or tried to discuss Rebecca's attitude problems. "Rebecca loves you like her own mother. She's trying so hard to help around here and make this work for all of us, and you're making her feel unwelcome and attacked for no reason. Help herself to my possessions and my dignity. Maybe, but certainly not helping me in any meaningful way." The moment when everything finally crystallized into perfect, terrifying clarity happened late one night when chronic insomnia had me wandering the house like a restless ghost. I'd gone to the kitchen for water when I heard their voices drifting softly from the living room, voices that assumed I was safely unconscious upstairs and couldn't hear their plotting. "The paperwork Jessica showed me makes the whole process look pretty straightforward," Rebecca was whispering with the excitement of someone discussing vacation plans. "If we document enough concerning incidents consistently over time, we can request a psychiatric evaluation for her own safety and the safety of others in the household." Kevin's response carried uncertainty and moral conflict. "I don't know about this, Rebecca. Having Mom committed to some facility seems really extreme. Maybe we should try talking to her regular doctor about memory care options or home health services first." "Kevin, she's getting noticeably worse every week," Rebecca replied with perfectly calculated emotion. "Today, she accused me of stealing her perfume she finished using weeks ago and forgot about. Yesterday, she couldn't remember conversations we'd had the day before. It's clearly affecting Noah's environment, and honestly, it's putting a tremendous strain on our relationship too." I pressed myself closer to the doorway, my pulse hammering in my ears so loudly I was worried they might hear it. I just can't imagine putting her in some institutional setting. She raised me, sacrificed everything for me after Dad died. She deserves better than being warehoused somewhere. You're not putting her away like unwanted furniture. You're getting her the professional medical help she desperately needs before she hurts herself or accidentally harms someone else, especially Noah. And think practically about this. Our son deserves stability and financial security. This house, his college fund, everything she's worked for and saved. If something unexpected happened to her tomorrow, wouldn't it be much smarter if we were already legally managing her affairs responsibly? That last sentence hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest, knocking the breath out of my lungs and making me dizzy with realization. They weren't planning to care for me in my declining years. They were planning to systematically erase me from my own life and take control of everything I'd worked for during my entire adult existence. The morning after I'd given them their eviction notice, I woke up feeling like I'd finally rediscovered my backbone after months of letting it collect dust in storage. In less than 12 hours, these two professional parasites would be packing their bags and looking for their next set of suckers to manipulate and con. I was actually humming an old jazz standard while making my morning coffee, already planning how I'd redecorate the house once they were gone, when I heard multiple vehicles pulling into my driveway with the efficiency of a military operation. Through the kitchen window, I saw an ambulance, a county mental health van, and a police cruiser parked outside like I was hosting the world's most depressing block party. Two men in medical uniforms were walking toward my front door with clipboards, official expressions, and that professional "we're here to help" demeanor that immediately made my blood pressure spike into the danger zone. Well, wasn't this a delightfully unexpected plot twist? What absolutely perfect timing that mental health professionals would arrive at my doorstep exactly 12 hours after I'd shown their meal tickets the exit door. The coincidence was so remarkable it could have won awards for creative scheduling. Kevin appeared at my side before I could fully process what was happening, his voice carrying that practiced, concerned son tone he'd apparently been rehearsing for weeks. "Mom, these people are here to help you. You seemed really confused and agitated yesterday evening. We're worried about your safety." Confused? I looked at him like he'd suddenly grown a second head and started speaking ancient Greek. "The only thing I'm confused about is how you managed to arrange this professional intervention so quickly. Do mental health services typically work on such short notice? Or did you have this planned in advance?" Rebecca materialized from the hallway like a ghost appearing for a haunting, complete with Noah in her arms and fresh tears streaming down her face in what had to be the performance of her entire acting career. "Mrs. Sandra, we're so terribly worried about you. Yesterday you were saying such strange, hurtful things, and this morning you seemed completely disoriented when you woke up. You didn't even remember our conversation from last night." Disoriented? The only thing disorienting was watching my own family orchestrate my betrayal in real time with the precision of a Swiss watch and the ethics of a pack of hungry wolves. One of the medical professionals stepped forward with his clipboard already filled out in suspicious detail. "Ma'am, your family has expressed serious concerns about your mental state and cognitive function. They've provided extensive documentation of concerning behavior patterns, and we're here to transport you for a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric evaluation." Documentation? I laughed, but there was absolutely no humor in the sound. What kind of comprehensive documentation could they possibly have created overnight? Or have you been planning this little surprise party for longer than I realized? But Kevin was already showing them official-looking papers printed on letterhead from doctors whose names I'd never heard in my life, forms that had apparently been prepared well in advance of yesterday's confrontation. "She's been having serious episodes for months now," he said with the practiced sadness of a soap opera actor going for an Emmy nomination. "Progressive memory loss, paranoid accusations against family members, aggressive behavior toward people trying to help her. Because you have been stealing from me." "You manipulative little weasel," I snapped, but I could see in their eyes that they'd already decided I was the unstable, unreliable one in this carefully orchestrated scenario. The lead paramedic's voice was gentle, but absolutely firm, like he was speaking to a child having a violent tantrum in a grocery store. "Ma'am, that kind of accusatory thinking and hostile language is exactly what we're concerned about. Your family clearly loves you and wants what's best for your health and safety." As they guided me toward the van with gentle but irresistible pressure, because apparently resisting their assistance would just prove their point about my mental instability, I caught sight of Rebecca watching from the doorway with Noah. She wasn't crying anymore, naturally. She was practically glowing with satisfaction, like someone who'd just won the lottery and solved world hunger in the same afternoon. "Don't worry about anything, Sandra," she called out in her sweetest, most innocent voice. "We'll take such wonderful care of everything while you're getting the professional help you need." The van doors closed with finality, and I watched my house disappear behind me through the small window. These two had just played their ace card with masterful timing, and I had to admit it was an absolutely brilliant move that I never saw coming. The psychiatric wing of County General Hospital turned out to be a clean, well-staffed facility that definitely wasn't the medieval dungeon I'd been imagining during the ride over. but it was still fundamentally a place where they kept people who couldn't take care of themselves, and I was absolutely, unequivocally not one of those people, despite what my fraudulent paperwork claimed. The intake process was thorough, humbling, and designed to make you feel like you'd lost control of your own life before you'd even unpacked your belongings. They had me fill out endless forms about my mental state, took my blood pressure multiple times, asked me to rate my confusion and agitation on a scale of 1 to 10, and wanted detailed explanations for why my loving family thought I needed professional intervention. I wanted to tell them my agitation was definitely a 10 because I'd been betrayed by the two people I'd trusted most in the world. But I didn't think that was the kind of emotional distress they were interested in documenting for their official records. They assigned me to a room with Elena Martinez, a retired social worker in her 70s who'd been fighting her own family's attempt to gain legal guardianship over her assets and personal decisions. Elena had sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of quiet competence that missed absolutely nothing important. "Let me take a wild guess about your situation," she said, after the nurses finished their orientation speech and left us alone to get acquainted. Loving family members who suddenly developed deep, overwhelming concern for your mental well-being right around the time you started asking uncomfortable questions about money or property? I stared at her in complete amazement. How could you possibly know that? Are you psychic, or is this just a really common story around here? Elena set down the legal thriller she'd been reading and gave me a look that was equal parts sympathy and steel determination. "Because you're the third woman this year with nearly identical circumstances who's ended up in this same room. Adult children who mysteriously discover they have hearts full of love and heads full of financial opportunity." She'd worked in elder services for 25 years before retirement, specializing in abuse cases and family dynamics gone wrong. Her own stepchildren had made their move after her husband died and left her everything. But Elena had seen the warning signs early and documented their behavior meticulously. "The advantage you have right now," she said, settling into her chair like we were planning a military campaign rather than just chatting about our situations, "is that I know exactly how this system works from the inside. I also know someone on the outside who can help us. If you're willing to fight for your freedom instead of just accepting what they're trying to do to you." Over the following days, Elena became my personal guide through the complex maze of patient rights, evaluation procedures, legal protections, and bureaucratic loopholes that most people never know exist until they desperately need them. She also shared something that gave me the first real hope I'd felt since arriving. Her former colleague David Martinez had left social services and was now specializing exclusively in elder abuse cases. "David's been tracking these situations for the past 2 years," Elena explained during one of our daily walks in the small courtyard. "He's discovered that families are increasingly using psychiatric holds as convenient shortcuts around proper guardianship procedures and legal oversight." Elena had been meticulously documenting everything during her stay: staff interactions, evaluation inconsistencies, visiting patterns, and procedural violations. She wasn't just fighting for her own release. She was building evidence for a broader investigation into how easy it had become for families to warehouse inconvenient relatives. "They think you'll just fade away quietly in here while they redecorate your house and spend your money," Elena said, with the kind of smile that probably made opposing attorneys wake up in cold sweats. "But they seriously underestimated something important. You're not the type of woman who goes down without a fight." No, I definitely wasn't. And with Elena's help, I was about to prove exactly how much fight this supposedly confused old lady had left in her. Getting out of County General required patience I didn't know I possessed, and strategic thinking I was learning from Elena on a crash course basis. But her contact, attorney David Martinez, turned out to be exactly what I needed. Someone who understood both the legal system's complexities and the righteous anger that comes with watching families systematically destroy their elderly relatives for financial gain. When David visited me after my first week of incarceration, he brought a briefcase full of similar cases and a determination that reminded me why I'd always respected lawyers who actually fought for justice instead of just collecting fees. "Mrs. Sandra," he said, settling into the visitor's chair like he was prepared for a long war rather than a quick consultation. "What's happened to you fits a documented pattern we've been tracking across multiple counties. Families are increasingly using psychiatric evaluations to bypass traditional guardianship procedures and expedite asset transfers without proper legal oversight. My first breakthrough came when I convinced David to help me contact Nancy during one of my strictly supervised phone calls. I managed to reach Rebecca's mother and explain my situation quickly before the staff could decide I'd talked long enough. "I've been expecting this call for months," Nancy said, her voice carrying the familiar exhaustion of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. "Sandra, I know precisely what my daughter's doing, because she's perfected this exact same scheme on 3 other family members. Give me a few days to gather what you'll need to fight back." What Nancy gathered over the next week was more damaging to Rebecca's credibility than I dared hope for. Not boxes of conveniently pre-existing evidence, but a systematic collection of police reports, medical records, and witness statements she compiled by methodically reaching out to other family members who'd been Rebecca's previous victims. When Nancy arrived for visiting hours, she brought documentation spanning several years: theft reports filed by Rebecca's elderly grandmother, a restraining order from her aunt following financial abuse, medical records showing a history of prescription drug abuse and manipulation, and sworn statements from 3 different relatives about Rebecca's consistent pattern of targeting vulnerable family members. "My daughter isn't just troubled or misunderstood," Nancy told David during their private meeting in the facility's conference room. "She's dangerous in a very specific, calculated way. She identifies vulnerable people who want to trust her and help her, and then she systematically destroys their lives while making them think they're losing their minds." The independent psychiatric evaluation David arranged was conducted by Dr. Rebecca Chen, a court-approved specialist who spent an entire afternoon putting me through every cognitive test and mental health assessment imaginable. Memory tests, logical reasoning, emotional stability evaluations, and questions designed to detect any sign of genuine mental decline or psychological instability. "Mrs. Sandra," Dr. Chen said when she'd finished reviewing all her test results and notes, "you're demonstrating cognitive function well above average for any age group, let alone someone in their 70s. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sharp, and your emotional responses are completely appropriate, given your circumstances." She paused, frowning as she reviewed the documentation that had been used to justify my commitment. "However, I'm deeply concerned about the medical records and incident reports used to justify your involuntary commitment. Several of these reported episodes are medically inconsistent with any recognized pattern of cognitive decline, and the timeline doesn't match established research on dementia progression." "What exactly are you saying, doctor?" "I'm saying someone fabricated evidence of mental illness with considerable sophistication. And that's not just unethical medical fraud. It's criminal conspiracy that could result in serious felony charges for everyone involved. The wheels of justice might turn slowly, but when they finally started moving in my direction, they picked up speed faster than I'd expected." David filed emergency motions. Elena provided expert testimony about elder abuse patterns, and Nancy's documentation painted a picture of Rebecca as a serial predator who'd been perfecting her techniques for years. But the real breakthrough came when David discovered that Rebecca had been using my stolen backup phone to coordinate with other potential victims. She'd been running what amounted to a small-scale elder abuse operation, targeting multiple elderly relatives and family friends simultaneously. "She's not just an opportunistic thief," David explained during one of our strategy sessions. "She's been operating a systematic scheme to identify and exploit vulnerable seniors. This goes way beyond simple family dysfunction." The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but I knew that getting out was only the first step. I had to get home and reclaim my life before they could do any more damage to my finances, my property, or worst of all, my relationship with Noah. Walking out of County General after 3 weeks felt like stepping back into my own life, but I wasn't the same woman who'd been dragged away in that van. I was sharper, angrier, and absolutely determined to make them pay for every single day they'd stolen from me and every lie they'd told about my mental capacity. Nancy met me at the discharge desk with David, and I could see from their expressions that they had news, the kind that would make me very, very happy indeed. "Mrs. Sandra," David said as we drove toward my house, "while you were getting evaluated, we've been building a case that's going to change everything for you. We're not just talking about getting your house back. We're talking about criminal charges that will put them both behind bars where they belong. The sight of my house made my stomach clench with a mixture of rage and determination. They'd been busy during my absence. New curtains hanging in the windows, different landscaping around the front entrance, even a different doormat that said "Home Sweet Home" in cheerful letters. Like they'd been systematically erasing me one detail at a time and replacing me with their own vision of domestic bliss. Kevin answered the door, and the expression on his face was worth every difficult, humiliating moment I'd endured over the past 3 weeks. Pure, unadulterated shock mixed with the dawning realization that his elaborate plan had just exploded in his face like a defective firework. "Mom? What are you doing here? The doctors said you needed extended care for your own safety." "The doctors said I'm perfectly fine." "Actually," I replied with the sweetest smile I could manage, brushing past him into what was still legally my house. Funny how that works when you get a real psychiatric evaluation instead of relying on fabricated medical records. Rebecca appeared from the kitchen holding Noah, and I watched her face cycle through surprise, panic, and finally that calculating look I'd learned to recognize and despise. But this time, I wasn't intimidated by it in the slightest. "Sandra, we're so relieved you're feeling better," she said, manufacturing fresh tears with impressive speed and conviction. "But are you sure you should be here? The facility said you still needed professional supervision and medication management." "Oh, the facility said lots of interesting things," I interrupted, pulling out the thick folder David had prepared for this exact moment. "But what's really fascinating is this documentation about your previous victims. Did you know your own aunt filed a restraining order against you for elder abuse? Or that you've been using my stolen phone to coordinate with other potential targets?" The silence in that room was absolutely delicious, thick enough to cut with a knife and serve for dinner. David stepped forward like the avenging angel he truly was. "Kevin, Rebecca, I'm attorney David Martinez, specializing in elder abuse cases. We need to discuss criminal charges including conspiracy, fraud, theft, elder abuse, and filing false medical reports. You have the right to remain silent, but I'd strongly suggest you start talking to your own lawyers immediately." I watched their faces as reality crashed down around them like a house of cards in a hurricane. Kevin looked like he might throw up right there on my newly cleaned carpet. Rebecca looked like she was already calculating her next move, trying to figure out which lie might still work in her favor. "Oh, and one more thing," I added, gently taking Noah from Rebecca's arms before she could object. "Pack your belongings. You're both leaving my house today, and this time it's absolutely permanent. Noah stays with me where he belongs." Watching their carefully constructed world collapse in real time was even more satisfying than I'd imagined during those long nights in the hospital. Sometimes justice really is served ice cold, and it tastes absolutely perfect. 2 years later, I'm sitting in my garden watching Noah chase soap bubbles while I sip coffee that tastes like victory and smells like justice finally served. The house is peaceful, completely mine again, and filled with the kind of quiet contentment that only comes after surviving a war and emerging victorious on the other side. The legal aftermath exceeded even my most vengeful fantasies in the best possible way. Kevin eventually accepted a plea deal that got him 8 months in county jail and 3 years of probation, along with mandatory counseling that David insisted might actually help him develop something resembling a backbone and moral compass. The counseling seems to be working slowly. Kevin visits Noah now under supervised conditions, but our relationship resembles a cautious business arrangement more than the mother-son bond we once had. Some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal, no matter how much time passes. Rebecca, on the other hand, fought her charges all the way to trial with the arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences for her actions. Armed with Nancy's comprehensive documentation and Dr. Chen's expert testimony about the fabricated medical records, David painted a picture of systematic elder abuse that had the jury reaching their unanimous guilty verdict in exactly 34 minutes. She was convicted on multiple felony counts: elder abuse, fraud, theft, conspiracy, filing false medical reports, and identity theft. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 3 years, and her parental rights were permanently terminated, the best possible outcome for Noah's future well-being and safety. Nancy has become more than just an ally in this fight. She's become the family I'd forgotten I needed and deserved. She babysits Noah when I have errands to run or doctor's appointments to attend, and we've developed the kind of deep friendship that grows from surviving the same hurricane and helping each other rebuild afterward. We garden together, cook elaborate Sunday dinners, and sometimes just sit on the porch, sharing comfortable silence while Noah naps peacefully between us. I failed completely with Rebecca, Nancy told me recently, while Noah played with his toy trucks at our feet. But maybe helping you raise my grandson right can be my second chance at getting motherhood correct this time around. The financial settlement from the civil lawsuit covered all my legal expenses, and then some. But more importantly, it established legal precedent that's helping other families fight similar battles across the state. David now handles dozens of elder abuse cases each year, and Elena, who was released shortly after me and has become a close friend, has become a fierce advocate for seniors' rights and legal protections. David's law firm has grown into a small but mighty organization that specializes in protecting elderly people from predatory family members, and they've won compensation for victims totaling over $2 million in the past 18 months alone. Sometimes people ask if I regret being so trusting initially, if I blame myself for not recognizing the warning signs sooner, or if I've become bitter about the whole experience. But here's what I've learned through this entire ordeal. The problem was never that I had too much faith in people or that I was too generous with my trust. The problem was that some people have too little character and moral foundation to deserve that faith in the first place. Noah toddles over and climbs into my lap, chattering excitedly about flowers and pointing at my roses with the pure joy and wonder that only small children possess. He calls me Nana now instead of the mama Rebecca had been teaching him, and every time he says it, I'm reminded that some victories are worth every single battle you have to fight to achieve them. I didn't just survive their elaborate betrayal and systematic abuse, I turned it into my comeback story, my second chance at life, and my opportunity to protect other people from going through what I experienced. And that's something no one can ever steal from me again, no matter how hard they might try. The people who tried to bury me forgot something crucial about my generation. We're not dead yet, and we know exactly how much fight we have left in us. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.